They laughed at my empty wallet. But none of them knew what my grandfather had already decided. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 27, and I work as a night shift cashier at a small gas station in St. Louis. I've always been quiet, reserved, the kind of man who values family above money. When people mock me, I don't fight back. I stay silent. But I never forget. Grandpa's birthday had always been the one event where the family gathered under one roof. 80 years this time, a milestone that demanded formality. The dining hall was dressed in gold and white, chandeliers scattering light across polished marble floors. To anyone else, it was beautiful. To me, it was suffocating. I arrived with my modest shirt pressed as best as I could manage, black shoes still scuffed from long nights behind the counter at the gas station. In my hands, I carried a gift. A second-hand leather-bound journal I'd cleaned and wrapped myself. It wasn't much, but it was all I could afford. My palms were damp, not from the weight of the box, but from the knowledge of how little it would mean in a room filled with luxury. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the air shift. My cousins were already there. Sharp suits, shiny watches, and rehearsed smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. They looked like they belonged on a stage. Their wealth draped over them like costumes. Mine, I suppose, was a costume too, but not the kind that impressed anyone. Daniel, one of them said, drawing out my name as if it tasted unfamiliar. I nodded politely, forcing a smile. Good to see you. Their eyes flicked to the small box in my hand and then back to each other, smirking without words. I pretended not to notice. Pretending had become second nature to me. Pretending not to hear, not to care, not to break. I moved toward Grandpa, who sat in his usual armchair near the head of the room. His frame was thinner now, his face mapped with years of work and wisdom. But his eyes were still sharp, sharper than anyone gave him credit for. I bent down, handed him the wrapped journal and whispered, "Happy birthday, Grandpa." He smiled faintly, his hand resting on mine longer than necessary. "Thank you, Daniel," he said, his voice low, measured. There was something in the way he looked at me, but I didn't linger. I stepped back, letting the others surround him with their expensive bottles of wine, leather briefcases, and watches that cost more than my entire year's wages. The evening unfolded as expected. Laughter filled the room, but it wasn't the kind that warmed the heart. It was sharp, layered with pride, with arrogance. My cousins swapped stories about business trips, about new cars, about the money they made last quarter. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, sipping water, my plate only half full. Occasionally, Grandpa's gaze would drift toward me, and I wondered what he saw. Did he see a failure, or did he see the only one in the room who wasn't trying to perform? I wanted to believe this night would remain peaceful, that their attention would stay on themselves and leave me invisible. I was wrong. Still, in that first hour before the cracks began to show, I allowed myself a small illusion. That I was simply a grandson at his grandfather's birthday. That for once family mattered more than status. That maybe, just maybe, love hadn't been replaced entirely by greed. I should have known better. Because in that room, dressed in gold and laughter, silence was already choosing its side. It started small. A whisper carried across the table, followed by a chuckle quickly disguised as a cough. I knew it was about me. You develop that sense when you've spent years being the quiet one in the room. The eyes, the smirks, the tilt of a glass, they're never as subtle as people think. My cousin Jeremy leaned toward another, murmuring something while his gaze flicked in my direction. Their laughter was soft at first, the kind of laugh you'd miss if you weren't already listening for it. But I was listening. I always listened. I lowered my eyes to the food on my plate, pushing a piece of bread across it with my fork, pretending I was too distracted to notice. Inside, every word, every glance, every muffled laugh was carved into me. That's how I've survived all these years. I don't confront. I collect. Night shift, right? Another cousin said suddenly, louder than the whispers. His voice carried down the long dining table. Gas station, isn't it? The table chuckled. I looked up just enough to give a small nod. Yes. The answer seemed to amuse them more than silence would have. I could almost hear the calculations in their minds. How little I made, how small my world must be compared to theirs. They clinked glasses together, smirks painted across their faces, congratulating themselves on a joke I hadn't even tried to resist. Grandpa remained quiet, sipping his wine slowly. His expression didn't change, but his eyes never left me. That detail at the time felt insignificant. Later I would understand it was everything. The whispers grew bolder as the evening wore on. Words like failure and embarrassment floated just loud enough for me to catch. They compared cars, bragged about promotions, then circled back to my job. "Imagine staying up all night selling cigarettes and gas to strangers," one said, and the table erupted in laughter. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. Instead, I took a slow breath and stared at the candle burning in front of me. Its flame flickered but held steady, even as air currents swirled around it. I thought about how similar it felt to me. Small, fragile, but not extinguished. Moments like that, you learn the value of silence. Anger would have given them satisfaction. Defensiveness would have fueled their cruelty. But silence unsettles people. It leaves them wondering what you're thinking, what you might do. I let them wonder. One cousin leaned too close to another, thinking I couldn't hear. "If Grandpa leaves the company to someone like him, it'll be ruined in a week." The others laughed again. Sharp, careless laughter. I took a sip of water, steadying my hand on the glass so they wouldn't see it shake. Inside, though, I was trembling. Not with fear, not even with shame, but with something heavier. Something colder. Humiliation has a strange way of shaping a man. For some, it crushes them. For others, it carves them into something harder. That night, I felt the carving begin. Still, I said nothing. I smiled faintly as though I hadn't heard a thing. That was always my weapon, to act untouched. To let them laugh while I remembered. They believed their words were harmless entertainment, jokes to pass the evening. They couldn't see how every insult was a thread, weaving a quiet resolve inside me. And as their laughter filled the room, mine never came, only silence. Heavy, patient silence. It didn't take long for the whispers to lose their restraint. Mockery, once hidden in corners of the table, finally decided to stretch its legs and walk out into the open. It was Jeremy who lit the match. He had always been the loudest, the one who mistook arrogance for confidence. He raised his glass of wine, his watch glinting under the chandelier, and said, "Let's make a toast to success." Everyone turned to him, glasses ready. Jeremy grinned, then glanced down the table at me. "Some of us build futures, some of us, well, they sell candy bars at midnight for pocket change." Laughter erupted. Not the careful kind anymore, but bold, unapologetic laughter. The kind that fills a room and sharpens its edges. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I set it down carefully, quietly, as if sudden movement would make things worse. The blood rushed to my ears, but my face stayed calm. I forced a small smile, the kind you give when you want people to think their words don't touch you. But they did. Every word lodged deep, one cousin chimed in, smirking. "Careful, Jeremy. He's probably keeping track of every dollar you spend tonight. Might take him a year just to save that much." The table howled. A few slapped their palms against the polished wood. Grandpa's expression didn't change. He sat with his glass in hand, eyes steady, almost unreadable. It was as if he was watching a play unfold, a play only he knew the ending of. "Come on, Daniel," another cousin teased, leaning forward, voice dripping with fake innocence. "Tell us, and how much do you make? Enough for the bus ride here?" Their laughter rang again. I looked at them slowly, one by one, meeting their eyes, holding their gaze for just a second longer than comfort allowed. I didn't speak. I didn't shake. I simply looked. It unsettled them, just slightly. But then Jeremy smirked, lifting his glass again. "Don't stare too hard, cousin. Might scare us with those big cashier eyes." That broke them. The entire table roared, wine spilling, forks clattering against plates. And there I sat, still as stone, a faint smile curving my lips. Inside, though, something shifted. Something irreversible. I thought about the years I had sacrificed. The nights alone in that small gas station, working while others slept, carrying the weight of bills I could barely pay. I thought about how I never complained, never asked for pity, never demanded recognition. And yet here I was, a spectacle for their entertainment. In that moment, humiliation turned into something else, something colder. I realized I didn't need to fight them with words. I didn't need to defend myself. Because people who laugh that easily, who mock that carelessly, always reveal their weakness. They believe the moment will last forever, but nothing lasts forever. The laughter finally faded, replaced by the clinking of glasses, the scraping of silverware. The room buzzed with comfort again, as if nothing had happened. For them it was just a joke. For me it was the moment the line was drawn. I didn't feel anger boiling inside me. No, it was calmer than that. A strange stillness settled in my chest, the kind of stillness that waits. I lowered my eyes to the table, cutting into the untouched bread on my plate. I took a slow bite, chewed, and swallowed. They thought the humiliation was complete. They thought I was too small, too poor, too silent to matter. And they were right. For now. But the truth was simple. Something inside me had already broken. And once something breaks, it never goes back to the way it was. After the laughter died down, the room settled into a rhythm of clinking glasses, forks scraping porcelain, and conversations about stocks, vacations, and promotions. For everyone else, the moment was forgotten. For me, it wasn't. The sting of their words still lingered in my chest, but what weighed on me more was the silence, not mine, but Grandpa's. He hadn't said a word during the entire scene. Not once had he interrupted their jokes or silenced their cruelty. He simply sat there, back straight, eyes heavy, sipping his wine as though it were water. At first I thought his silence was indifference. Maybe he agreed with them. Maybe he thought I was an embarrassment too. The idea pressed down on me harder than the laughter ever could. To be mocked by cousins was one thing. To be abandoned by the man I admired most, that would be unbearable. I kept my head down, tracing the rim of my glass with my finger, pretending I was absorbed in the flickering candlelight. Every so often I would glance at him. His expression never changed, calm, unreadable, almost distant. But his eyes told a different story. They weren't amused like the others. They weren't dismissive either. No, they were fixed on me, sharp and deliberate, as if he was measuring something only he could see. The longer the evening went on, the more I noticed it. Each time my cousins laughed, he didn't. Each time someone boasted, his lips pressed tighter. Each time I stayed silent, he looked at me, not with pity, not with disappointment, but with something else I couldn't yet define. Still, his silence cut me. I wanted him to speak, to defend me, to remind them that hard work mattered more than fancy suits or expensive cars. But no words came, and so I sat there quietly unraveling, believing I was alone. "Daniel," one cousin called from down the table, breaking me from my thoughts. "You still living in that little apartment by the gas station?" I nodded once. "Yes." Snickers circled the table. Someone muttered, "Figures." I lowered my gaze again, but not before noticing Grandpa's hands tighten around the stem of his glass. His knuckles whitened, but he said nothing. The rest of the dinner passed in fragments. Laughter here, a toast there, the band playing softly in the corner. I ate sparingly, each bite tasteless, my appetite gone. Across the room, my cousins basked in their own glow, clapping each other on the back, congratulating themselves on achievements that seemed less like victories and more like privileges. And through it all, Grandpa's silence hung like a shadow. I wondered if he even saw me, the grandson who never made him proud, the one who had nothing to show but tired eyes and calloused hands. Maybe his silence was the confirmation of what I feared most, that I truly didn't belong at this table. When dessert arrived, he cleared his throat lightly but said nothing. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his cane. His gaze swept across the table, pausing on each face. When his eyes landed on me, I looked away, unable to bear the weight of them any longer. In that moment, I believed he had chosen his side. Theirs. The polished, successful, wealthy heirs. Not mine. I was wrong. Because while I thought his silence meant abandonment, it was something else entirely. It was patience, observation, waiting, and that patience would soon change everything. Dessert had barely been touched when the sound of Grandpa's cane tapped twice against the floor. The chatter faded immediately. Even my cousins, drunk on their own laughter and wine, straightened in their seats. When Grandpa spoke, no one dared to talk over him. He didn't start with a toast. He didn't mention the cake. He didn't even thank anyone for coming. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice low but firm, the kind of tone that demanded silence. "At 80 years old," he began, "I've seen enough to know one thing. Nothing lasts forever. Not health, not wealth, not even laughter." The room grew still. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, their smiles faltering as they realized this wasn't the light-hearted speech they expected. I built this company from the ground up, Grandpa continued. It wasn't handed to me. I didn't inherit it. I didn't buy my way into it. I worked when others doubted me. I sacrificed when others mocked me. And I remember who stood with me when I had nothing. My heart tightened. He wasn't looking at me directly, but his words cut through me all the same. Jeremy, ever bold, raised his glass and forced a laugh. To hard work, then. May we all keep it going strong. A few cousins chuckled nervously, eager to lighten the mood. But Grandpa didn't join them. He fixed Jeremy with a stare so sharp it silenced him instantly. The future of this family and of this company has been on my mind for a long time, Grandpa said, his hand resting on the table, steady and deliberate. I know many of you expect it to fall into your hands. That's natural. You think wealth is your inheritance simply because you were born into it. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. I felt my throat tighten. My cousin's eyes darted between one another, nervous but still confident. I, on the other hand, shrank into my chair. This was the moment. The decision. And I was certain of the outcome. They were right. I was nobody, a gas station cashier living paycheck to paycheck. Grandpa wouldn't entrust the empire he had built to someone like me. Still, my heart pounded as his eyes slowly scanned the table, pausing on each face as though taking final measure. When his gaze reached mine, I lowered my eyes, not wanting to see disappointment in them. But then, he spoke my name, Daniel. The room froze. Every cousin turned toward me, their smirks returning in unison as if expecting another joke at my expense. I looked up slowly, my voice quiet. Yes, Grandpa? He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slightly, as though confirming something to himself. Stand up. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that pressed on my chest. My legs felt heavy, but I pushed my chair back and rose to my feet. The room buzzed with confused murmurs. Grandpa reached into his pocket. His hand trembled slightly, but his grip was steady when he pulled something out. A set of brass keys, old and worn, their shine dulled by decades of use. The sight of them made my cousins sit straighter. They recognized them instantly. The keys to the company's main office, the symbol of leadership. Grandpa held them up, and the room fell completely silent. These, he said slowly, belong to the one person I trust to carry on what I started. Not because of wealth, not because of status, but because of character. I felt the air leave my lungs. My cousin stared in disbelief. Then with a deliberate motion, he extended his hand toward me. The laughter that had filled the room earlier died right there. The brass keys dangled from Grandpa's hand, catching the light like a crown jewel. For a second, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. My cousins stared, eyes wide, their grins wiped away as though someone had slapped them clean off their faces. I stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Surely this was some sort of test. Grandpa was known for teaching lessons in dramatic ways. Maybe he was about to pull the keys back, laugh, and hand them to Jeremy, the cousin who had always been the golden child. But he didn't. His hand stayed extended, steady and unshaking despite his years. Take them, Daniel, he said, his voice calm but unyielding. I hesitated, my pulse hammering in my ears. The room felt smaller, hotter. Slowly, almost unwillingly, I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the cold brass. Grandpa released them and the weight of the keys dropped into my palm like a thunderclap. The silence shattered. What the hell is this? Jeremy shot up from his chair, his face flushed red. You're kidding, right, him? You're giving him the company? Another cousin, Lisa, scoffed loudly. He works at a gas station, for crying out loud. What does he know about running a business? Voices erupted all around me, overlapping, angry, desperate. Some cousins pleaded with Grandpa, others mocked me openly, their words sharp and cruel. Daniel doesn't deserve this. He hasn't earned a damn thing. This is insane. I clutched the keys tighter as if they might be ripped away. My throat was dry, but I couldn't form a single word. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I hadn't asked for this, hadn't schemed for it, but my voice was buried under the storm of outrage. Grandpa slammed his palm on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot, silencing the chaos instantly. His eyes, still fierce despite his age, swept over the room. I've made my decision, he declared. And it is final. Jeremy's jaw clenched. He leaned forward, practically spitting his words. Final? You'd really throw away everything you built on On him, he's nothing but a failure. The insult stung, but I barely had time to react before Grandpa's voice cut through again, colder now. You call him a failure because you measure success by wealth and status. I measure it by integrity. While the rest of you drown in greed and entitlement, Daniel works quietly, honestly. He doesn't pretend to be more than he is. That's why he's the only one worthy of carrying this forward. My chest tightened. For years I'd felt invisible. The outcast cousin with nothing to show for himself. But here was Grandpa lifting me up in front of everyone, not because I was clever or wealthy, but because I was me. The room simmered with resentment. My cousins looked at me with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. Their smiles had twisted into sneers. I knew then that this was only the beginning. Grandpa leaned back, his hand trembling slightly now that the fury had left him. He nodded toward me. Put the keys on the table, Daniel. Let them see who holds them now. With a shaking hand, I placed the brass keys gently onto the polished wood. The clink echoed in the silence. For a brief, surreal moment, the symbols of power that my cousins had dreamed of for years sat between us, and they were mine. The air in the room shifted. Something had broken that could never be repaired. I saw it in their eyes. The betrayal, the hatred, the vow of revenge already forming behind their clenched jaws. The empire had been passed to me. And in that moment I realized the war for it had just begun. The keys lay on the table, gleaming under the chandelier. I couldn't look away from them. They didn't just represent power. They represented the storm that had been unleashed. I could feel their stares burning into me. A dozen pairs of eyes filled with rage, envy, and disbelief. My cousins' faces told stories louder than their words ever could. Jeremy's was the easiest to read. Pure venom. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. He had always been certain he would inherit the empire. He carried himself as if it were already his. Now he looked like a man robbed of his crown. Lisa, across the table, wore a mask of bitterness. Her eyes darted between Grandpa and me, cold and calculating. She wasn't one for loud protests like Jeremy. No, Lisa was dangerous in a quieter way. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, already plotting, already sharpening whatever knives she thought she could use. The younger cousins, usually full of jokes, sat stiff and silent. Their smirks were gone, replaced by a strange mix of fear and disappointment. They had always laughed at me, always pointed out my failures, but now the joke had turned on them. They didn't know whether to laugh again or scream. And me? I said nothing. I couldn't, my throat was locked. My hands trembled at my sides, hidden beneath the table. Silence was my only shield. Grandpa leaned back, sipping his water calmly as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb in the middle of dinner. You all wanted clarity, he said. Now you have it. Jeremy slammed his fist onto the table. The dishes rattled, silverware clinking in protest. This isn't over, he growled. His voice was low, almost feral. A chill ran through me. He wasn't just angry, he was dangerous. Lisa finally spoke, her tone icy. Daniel may have your blessing, Grandpa, but that doesn't mean he has ours. Her words lingered in the air like a curse. I forced myself to look at them, one by one. Their faces blurred together, twisted with greed, poisoned by entitlement. And I realized something painful. They would never see me as family again. From this moment forward, I wasn't their cousin. I was their enemy. Grandpa must have sensed it too. He tapped his cane on the floor once, sharp and deliberate. Respect my decision, he warned, or walk away from this family altogether. But the damage was already done. No threat, no warning could erase the hatred simmering in their eyes. When dinner finally ended, the room emptied with an awkward, suffocating quiet. No laughter, no goodbyes, no hugs. My cousins left one by one, each throwing me a final look, some full of disgust, others full of promise. Promises that one day somehow they'd take back what they believed was theirs. I stayed behind, still frozen in my chair. The keys sat on the table in front of me, their weight pressing on my chest like a stone. Grandpa placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. Do not mistake their silence for surrender, he said softly. They will come for you. They always come for what they cannot have. I nodded, though my voice still refused to come. My silence wasn't strength. It was fear, but in their faces, in their fury, I understood one truth. This was no gift. It was a burden, and it had just begun. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone at the table. The candles had burned low, dripping wax down their holders. The plates were still dirty, half-finished meals scattered across the table like abandoned battlefields. But my eyes were fixed only on one thing, the brass keys resting in front of me. I picked them up, turned them in my hand, felt the cold weight press against my skin. They looked so ordinary, just a set of metal keys like any other. And yet they carried the weight of an empire, the weight of a family, the weight of their hatred. In the polished surface of the keys, I caught my reflection. For the first time, I didn't see the gas station cashier who had been the butt of every joke. I didn't see the cousin left out of photos, mocked at every gathering. No, what I saw was someone different. Someone chosen. But power has a way of twisting reflections, because alongside pride came something darker. Fear, suspicion, doubt. Those keys weren't just a gift. They were a curse. A target painted on my back. Grandpa's cane tapped softly as he entered the room again. He moved slower now, the weight of age pressing down on him, but his eyes still carried the fire that had silenced a room of wolves. "You understand now, don't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though my throat was dry. "They'll never forgive me." "They don't need to," he said. "Forgiveness is weakness in the face of envy. What matters is whether you have the strength to hold what's been given to you." I looked back at the keys, my reflection staring at me through the dull brass. Strength. Did I have it? Could I really stand against them? Against Jeremy's rage, Lisa's cunning, and the silent resentment of every cousin who saw me as the undeserving heir. Grandpa placed his hand on my shoulder. "I gave you those keys not because of who you are today, but because of who you must become. Power will test you, Daniel. It will test your patience, your resolve, and your mercy. But most of all, it will test your silence, my silence. The very thing that had always been seen as weakness." Maybe he was right. Maybe silence wasn't emptiness. Maybe it was strength waiting for the right moment to strike. Outside, I heard car engines starting. I imagined my cousins in those cars whispering furiously, already planning their next move. The battle hadn't even begun, and yet I could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, a war brewing beneath the skin of our family. I closed my fist around the keys. They bit into my palm, sharp and unyielding. In that sting, I felt clarity. The reflection staring back at me wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs too. Their anger, their envy, their betrayal. Power reflects not only who holds it, but who desires it most. And in that reflection, I saw the path ahead. A path of silence. A path of endurance. A path of revenge, not mine, but theirs. Slowly circling, waiting for the first crack. I stood from the table, the keys clutched tightly in my hand. Grandpa's voice followed me, low and steady. "Remember, Daniel, power is never given. It is only borrowed, until someone stronger takes it away." I paused at the doorway, the shadows stretching long behind me. For the first time, I understood what those keys truly meant. Not victory, not inheritance, but war, and in the reflection of power I knew. This was only the beginning. That was the night everything changed. Hit like, subscribe, and drop in the comments where you're watching from.